Hi, I'm David Prescott, and the first thing you should know about me is that a number of my friends have said that I probably shouldn't ever speak into a video camera, that there might be some things that I'm good at, but maybe this isn't one of them. Still, I care passionately about the work that I do and wanted to take a few minutes to share my thoughts on it. Since the 1980s, I've been involved in various attempts at preventing sexual abuse. I say attempts because I worked as a child protective service worker for several years. I've worked as a psychotherapist working with people who have been sexually abused. I've done that for almost all of my career. And I've also worked with the people who have sexually abused themselves. I've worked in community settings, I've worked in prison settings, I've worked in a lot of different places. I like to say that it's one reason why my hair has, for the most part, all turned gray. The message that I have about this is that our communities matter, that one sex crime is one sex crime too many. And yet, if we're really going to make a difference in reducing the harm of sexual abuse, if we're going to make a difference in reducing sexual abuse, it's really important for us to understand and to be able to work with the people who do the sexual abuse. And so some people get into sexual abuse prevention by going into the schools and teaching about things like good touch and bad touch. And I honor them, I salute them. Everybody has the work that they're particularly good at, and I was okay at that. I believe that I'm a little bit more effective in actually working with the people who've caused sexual harm in order to prevent them from going on to abuse again. So that's why I do what I do. I'd like to share a few observations, if it's okay with you, on why I think the actual treatment piece is so important. All you have to do is go to any of the online news media outlets and take a look at the commentary about sexual abuse. We all know the tragedies, the Penn State tragedy, Steubenville, Ohio, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of tragedy out there. There's a lot of hurt out there. There's a lot of suffering out there. I've spent nearly 30 years trying to do something about it, and there's only so much that one human being can do. What I know is that each of us individual human beings is better when we come together as communities, as professional organizations, as groups of people bound and determined to do something about it. Sexual abuse has actually declined in recent decades. A recent study put out by the Bureau of Justice Statistics finds as much as a 60% reduction in sexual abuse, at least in the number of reported crimes. That's pretty impressive. Why is that? It's not because of our prisons. It's pretty well known that prisons don't reduce crime. There's really actually no question about that. Prisons are very good for punishment, but they're not necessarily, punishment is not the same thing as actually reducing crime. So why do we have a decrease? Is it because of excellent treatment programs? Probably not. There's not enough money to adequately even fund our treatment programs. The real reason why sexual abuse seems to have reduced in recent decades is because of people like you and me and others who come together and actually talk about it, who get together and say sexual abuse is not okay. I mean, we all know sexual abuse is not okay, but the message is more powerful when we're keeping it alive in the media and amongst ourselves, when talking over the back fence, when talking to our relatives, when talking to our neighbors. The simple fact is that the average sex offender who's in our community is only known to have been arrested for their crime once. There's a lot of sexual harm in our communities. Recent study found that as many as 8%, that's 8% of college-aged males, self-report having committed some kind of first-degree sexual assault or attempted sexual assault. That means the problem of sexual abuse is in our communities. It's on our streets. It can be in our families. And there's a lot of people who've been sexually abused. The good news is that not everybody reports having been seriously harmed by the sexual abuse that they've endured. And yet, on the other hand, one sexual crime, as I said before, is one sexual crime too many. What are we to make of all of this? If all you do is look at the news media, you're going to see only the most egregious crimes, especially crimes that look as if they could have somehow been prevented. Very often they could have been prevented. That's why people like me who work with sex offenders directly say we've simply got to fund our prevention efforts better than we do today. What else do we know? We know, as I've said earlier, that our prisons aren't doing very much to actually prevent sexual crime. If we're going to really think about sexual abuse as a society, we need to separate out punishing crimes from actually rehabilitating the people who do the crimes, from finding some way to make them safer in our community. At the end of the day, as a human being, as a professional, I am very much about finding ways to make people safer within the communities so that they can have healthier lives, so that we can all have healthier lives and safer communities. Punishment on its own doesn't work. Treatment on its own can work. Treatment on its own and with some kind of community supervision, like with a probation officer, parole officer, supervising agent, that's getting to be a little bit better still. But still, what's the X factor that makes people less likely to abuse? There's a lot of things that seem to contribute. A lot of our treatment programs in the past seem to be an extension of the legal system itself, where we had therapists who made it very, very clear that they objected to their clients on moral grounds, that they did not hold their clients in high regard. Those programs turn out not to have worked very well. There's been other programs that seem to show a lot more promise. In Canada, there's been some programs that have since been imported to other parts of the world that find that simply getting people who've caused harm to look at their lives and then to find some areas of success in their lives that they can build on, those programs are starting to make a dent. We've also found through scientific study and personal experience that programs where people who've done bad things, when they can get together and talk about the things that they've done right, the things that they plan to do in the future, when people come together and they can be accountable to one another, that those programs really are making a dent in sexual reoffense. These kinds of things are important for us to take a look at. I am not a thug hugger, and neither am I a defender of deviance, but I am an advocate for all human beings so that we can build healthier lives and a safer society. I've heard it said, there's a fellow named Doug Bauer in New Zealand. He says that he might have been the first to say this. Others might agree or might not. But Doug Bauer uses the acronym SOAP, S-O-A-P. He says that the safest sex offender is somebody who's stable, who's occupied, whether through a job or education. The safest sex offender is somebody who's accountable to others and who has a plan. And I think that this is an excellent observation that Doug has made. Although I mentioned Doug's name, there are many, many other brilliant minds, just as Doug is brilliant himself. But there's a lot of people who've made many similar observations, and it's important to take that into account as well. Still, if we want our communities to be safe, and we want the people within them to be safe, we should think about stability, occupation, accountability, and having some kind of a plan. Again, so why am I saying all of this? Why am I mentioning those four words in particular? It's because as recently as just a few years ago, under a bridge in Florida, we had sex offenders living under a bridge, the Julia Tuttle Causeway, because there was no place else for them to live because of residence restrictions that have almost uniquely been proven not to work. We had in the state of Iowa a group of sex offenders who were living in highway rest areas. Even the prosecutors in the state of Iowa said, this is not a good idea, this is not making our communities safer. And yet the laws didn't change for many, many years after that. And even more recently, the New York Times has reported on communities that are building small parks as big as the couch that I'm sitting on and putting a swing set there so that those communities can make it impossible for sex offenders to live there, thanks to the laws regarding where registered sex offenders can live. My point is, if we continue to engage in this kind of banishment, we're not building community safety. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. But very few people are actually doing anything about it. I was the president at one time of the largest professional organization of its kind in the world, the Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abusers. And as an organization, we took many stands in trying to stem the tide of these kinds of laws that were quite well intended, but weren't necessarily science-based. And continue as an individual, I'm continuing to try to do something about this. I know there are thousands of other people like me, so I don't claim to be special in any way, but I am saying that if we're really going to move this ball down the court to build safer communities, we need to join together, whether it be in professional organizations or just as communities, to try to do something about the harm of sexual abuse. There's many ways we can help the people who've been abused. We can work with the people who've done the abusing. We can get into schools and try to intervene early. But the one thing that I do know is that if we continue to defund our prevention efforts and our treatment efforts, then we as a society are going to have to hold ourselves accountable to the people who will be abused as a result of our failure to act. I realize that that alone is not a hopeful message, but I am hopeful because I know that strangers care and that people care and that professionals care about preventing sexual violence, and that sooner or later we all come together around the table to figure out good things to do. So I'm calling upon myself, I'm calling upon you and anybody that might be watching this video to do something to prevent further sexual abuse. So that's enough time taken. That's what I've got to say. Thanks for listening. Bye.